Good evening, and welcome to day 3 of 50 days. I'm excited because this evening I want to share an insight that came to me from a good friend, Mr. Harry. Mr. Harry is the person who makes sure that my daughter, Maya, stays safe during the daytime at her daycare. Mr. Harry is a very wise man, and he and I were having a conversation, and he said he ran into a young man who was only 25 years old who explained the problem with our world. He said, the problem with our world is that we are macro instead of micro. Well, I don't know about you, but maybe in school you took macroeconomics, and maybe you've heard micro and macro used before, but what's the difference? Well, I looked and I saw in the dictionary online that micro was dealing with an individual case or situation. But on the other hand, macro dealt with a broad or a general situation. So microeconomics might be my personal economics, and macroeconomics might be the economics of a nation. So the question is, what does that have to do with the problems of our world? I think what he was trying to get at is this. If I have a group of people, say people who are gay or people who are another race, and I have heard labels of what this race or this group of people are like, from a macro perspective, I judge them. I do not seek to connect with them or understand them. I just judge them as inferior and nothing that I want to be bothered with. But then what happens when micro interrupts my macro? What happens when I get stranded on the highway? What happens when I get stranded on the highway and I'm a white supremacist, but the only person who stops to help me is a poor black man in a beat-up car? What happens when I'm a fundamentalist who decries the horrors of transgender experience, but then I'm faced with a life or death situation and a transgender individual sacrifices themselves to save me? What I'm suggesting is this. In our experience as Christians, or whatever other group we may belong to, we have to be very careful of judging people from a broad perspective. I think the beauty of how Jesus dealt with people was he dealt with them on a micro relational perspective. He didn't allow the broad labels to keep him from the Samaritans. He didn't allow the broad labels to keep him from the women. He didn't allow the broad labels to keep him from hanging with the fishermen. He had the fishermen as his disciples, and he hung out with people of ill repute, but he was okay with that because he was not looking at them as a group that he judged from afar, from the macro, but instead he looked at them as individuals who he loved. I believe that God is calling us today to stop labeling people as a group from the macro and start engaging with people from the micro. If we learn to leave the macro and pursue the micro, we'll gain insight into who people really are. And we may find that our Holy Spirit indwelling experience, that our love inside our hearts will actually allow us to connect. And we may find that the Spirit of Christ does strange things that we didn't expect. We may find that the reason people aren't enthralled with our walk with God is because we haven't allowed His Spirit to take away our prejudices, to take away our guards, to take away our judgmental attitude, to take away our better than thou persona, and allow us to come to a point where we are humble, where we are vulnerable. And then people will really want to know the God that we serve because they'll want to be in our presence. So the problem is we spend too much time in the macro and not enough time in the micro. Well, this has been day 3. I'm excited about what's coming up in the future. I want you to pray about something. I believe that God is calling each of us to use. I want you to pray about something. I believe that God is calling each of us to use our personal influence in more powerful ways. I believe that God is calling each of us to leave this concept that there is some great Hollywood pie in the sky, better than thou, universal place where heroes come from and they descend and they're like gods and they are not like us. Rather, I would challenge you to believe that you are the hero that God intends to save your household and your community. I'm looking for people who are willing to pray and ask God to send His Holy Spirit upon them and to move them to act in heroic ways. I believe that for too long, people have been sold a bill of goods. They've seen people, whether they are celebrities from movies or music or in the political arena, they've seen people as celebrities as almost gods, and they worship them, and they feel that somehow they're different than you and I, and they feel that the heroic stuff should be done by the gods. Well, I'd like to challenge you to find God's work through you as the path of the hero. We'll talk more about that in future episodes. But for now, thank you so much. This has been David Griffiths, encouraging you to engage on the micro level and stop being only a distant observer of life from the macro. God bless you. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.